Let's start in South Africa, where about 62,000 citizens of that country have been in the top 1% of global wealth holders. That's according to Credit Suisse's fourth annual wealth report, which indicated about 43,000 South Africans are dollar millionaires. The survey indicates that the number of millionaires slid due to a 15% fall in the value of the rand against the American dollar this year. Now, the report also noted that about 71% of household wealth in the country is made up of financial assets. Wealth in Africa went up by about 1.2% to some $27 trillion, while wealth per adult was down 1.5% to just under $5,000. Estimates by Credit Suisse suggest that the number of global millionaires could exceed 47 million in 2018. That's a rise of nearly 16 million from current numbers. In commodity news, Shell Nigeria has shut down its Trans-Niger pipeline owing to reports of leaks. Now, that in turn has deferred 150,000 barrels per day of output of crude just 10 days after the pipeline was reopened. The latest leaks were reported at Bidere, Nonwatai and Bodo West, all of which happen to be in Ogoniland. Shell also said it had mobilized a spill response team. Now, the cause of the leak so far has not yet been determined. The company, however, blamed the previous shutdown on vandalism by oil thieves, leading it to declare force majeure on its Bonilite crude and on gas supplied to the Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas Company on the 23rd of September. Africa's biggest oil exporter has been producing about 15% below its installed capacity of 2.5 million barrels of crude per day this year, mainly due to widespread oil theft and leaks from aging infrastructure. Now, also on the continent, a non-profit group says it plans to replace deadly kerosene lamps prevalent among low-income households in Africa with safer solar alternatives. Is gaining momentum. The Solar Aid project says that the lamps could be eliminated from the continent as a whole in the next 8 years. As CCTV's Jito Abraham now reports.
International charity Solar Aid is hoping to consign Africa's dangerous kerosene lamps to history by providing high-quality, robust, solar-powered alternatives to poor, rural households across the continent. The charity wants to eliminate the lamps by 2020 and hopes to inspire a revolution in home-based microtechnology. Through the charity's social enterprise, Sunny Moon, solar-powered lights are sold rather than given away for free in an attempt to create a sustainable market. Pippa Palmer, SolarAid's managing director, says that after the initial purchase of $10, the lamps cost nothing to run and will last for up to 5 years. This ensures savings of 98% against kerosene use.
They will last for up to 5 years, and during that lifetime they will pay for themselves over and over. Once they're bought, they just throw out free light 4 hours a night. And it frees up the income from that would normally go onto kerosene, which we have found through our research goes on to better nutrition, onto education and onto farming inputs.
The charity says that 598 million off-grid Africans have no access to electricity and that this figure could rise to 700 million within a decade. The group has been providing lamps in Tanzania, Kenya, Malawi, and Zambia, where many rely on toxic and highly flammable kerosene for lighting.
The real danger is that these lamps, as the kerosene burns, the unburnt matter turns to a very fine particulate, a very fine soot, and that soot gets deep into the lungs, a major cause of respiratory illness. That soot also escapes, it's called black carbon, and it actually escapes 7 to 9% of the burn escapes into the house, and 89% of that goes into the atmosphere and has an instant global warming effect. So the effect on the environment is quite catastrophic.
All income generated by the sale of the lights is invested back into the country's charity works. Palmer says that for consumers, solar lights will pay for themselves after 12 weeks. She says the charity wants the lamps to provide a gateway into microtechnology to transform poor areas of Africa. The company has sold 500,000 solar lights in their first 3 years of operation and serviced around 2.5 million people. G2 Abraham, CCTV.
Now, 800 people have died and another 15,000 have been displaced in Darfur since January, but the conflict this time isn't about ethnic identity or politics. It's actually based on a precious metal. You see, gold has become Sudan's new favored natural resource, especially since South Sudan's secession in 2011, which took with it nearly $7 billion a year in oil production revenues. Now, the focus on gold has sparked fighting among tribes which once upon a time were united. Until last year, the Darfur conflict pitted the government and its Arab militias against three large rebel groups. Now, the Jebel Amar attack changed all that, dividing Arab tribes against each other while still clashing with rebel groups who also want control of the sources of the precious metal. Now, the death toll so far is double the number of all the people killed in fighting between the army, rebels and rival tribes in Darfur in all of 2012. Over in South Africa, President Jacob Zuma is urging employers and the labour sector in that country to resolve their disputes much faster so that the economy can return to full production. While addressing the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry's annual conference, the President of South Africa recognised the impact that strikes have on that country's economy, saying that government and businesses must work together to build the economy, and that was a task that could not and must not be left to the government alone. He underscored the importance of the task, saying labour and business must realise when navigating disputes that they do so under abnormal conditions brought about by the global economic meltdown.
Our message to employers and labour is that with the advantage of such a legal framework, they should conclude labour negotiations and disputes speedily. We urge the sectors, particularly those sectors with disputes that have not yet been resolved, to attend to them speedily so that the economy can return to full production.
Now, South Africa, in the meantime, is still well in the middle of strike season. You've got industrial action at the brewer SAB Miller, and the strike at Amplats is now in its second week. Lost output at Amplats is in the region of about $50 million or so at the moment. The motor industry, on the other hand, the strike over there cost local manufacturers about $2 billion. Here's CCTV's Angela Coppola with the latest.
These are the short-term costs. The long-term effects of the current protracted labour instability appear to already have become apparent as local and international investors reconsider their options. For example, the decision by BMW recently to withdraw its business case for a new plant. And the signs are there that it's not an isolated case.
We've seen already Renault putting its plant in Nigeria, and I have absolutely no doubt that many other bold decisions and investment decisions are going to slowly rethink. We won't see the impact of it immediately, but give it 3 to 5 years, we'll see the consequences of this protracted and fairly irrational labour behaviour.
The medium-term impacts are a consideration, but the government needs a solution to the current strike impasse.
What I think business should do, as well as labour, I think we should all appreciate that there is global economic meltdown, and therefore the situation is not as normal. That when we are faced with our disputes, we should handle them with that understanding. Because if we don't, we could in fact worsen our economic situation.
There is a commonly held view that isn't often expressed in public that perhaps it's time to reassess the country's labour legislation.
If we learn from our own history, we need to now, after 20 years, put a commission on labour and industrial relations to rethink and reassess, learn from our history, put it in the context of rapidly changing global environment, and come up with a new dispensation that will protect labour rights but will not be conducive to industrial relations instability.
The country can't afford having investors taking their capital and investing it in other parts of the world, because it's going to place pressure on an economy that's already under strain. Added to which, it's unlikely that labour legislation is going to change anytime soon. I'm Angelo Coppola for CCTV in Johannesburg.
At 17:40 GMT, it's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. The African economy is holding its collective breath over the potential of a technical US default. We're moving into Terra Nova when we come back.
BizAsia. Asia means business.
Welcome back. Ethiopia's Alan Potash has finally received a licensing mine for the Danakil Potash project in Ethiopia after the project was given the green light by the Ethiopian Council of Ministers. Now, the receipt of that license, Alana now has the required regulatory approvals to complete the development phase of the project and to move directly to contracting, construction and operations. The company overall, of course, is a publicly traded corporation with a focus on the acquisition and development of potash assets internationally, with a major focus on previously explored potash property in Ethiopia. Now, Alana has secured financial support from two significant strategic investors, the IFC, that's a member of the World Bank Group, and Liberty Metals and Mining, which is a member of the Liberty Mutual Group as well. Now, German cement maker Heidelberg Cement is positioning itself to play a key role in the construction sector in West Africa. It's put $250 million into a clinker plant in Togo, which will help to position the firm well ahead of an expected boom in infrastructure development in the region. Africa, of course, is widely seen to be entering a 20 to 30-year infrastructure investment cycle.
The $250 million clinker plant, financed with assistance from the International Finance Corporation, will have an annual capacity of some 1.5 million tons. In addition, Heidelberg Cement is constructing a new cement grinding facility with a capacity of some 200,000 tons in Dapang, just north of Lome. The investment is part of the group's strategy to expand its clinker and cement capacity in sub-Saharan Africa. The project is expected to stimulate improvement in local infrastructure and housing while creating an estimated 1,300 jobs.
I think we have a very good relationship with the people. We try and provide employment to the villagers from surrounding villages. It is our goal. Of course, the expectations are high, but for the moment, work is in progress.
Commissioning of the two new plants is scheduled for the year 2015, but construction is well underway.
I also hope that Heidelberg Cement's investment made here is beneficial to the environment, for people who live here, and therefore beneficial to the policy in Togo. That all actors, whether in government, investors and the public, work together and not against each other.
Nuuk is the German Chancellor's personal representative for Africa at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. West Africa possesses little limestone deposits, and until now, few have been commercially exploited.
I think it's important to see how raw materials are used in the field and what has stalled over the past 3 years. I had meetings with ministers of mines, as this is an important issue to me. I really wanted to see how practical the use of raw materials is, considering the many problems. This includes the environment, as it affects the surrounding villages, and there is also the transportation of coal and raw materials to the port.
Heidelberg Cement already operates 13 plants in 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, including Benin, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Gabon, Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Tanzania and Togo. In Burkina Faso, construction of a new cement mill is scheduled to start soon. Peter Okaba, CCTV.
Now, ahead of a visit to the White House by House Democrat leaders, the US dollar did post gains earlier today, and equities around the world from Europe to South Africa responded in kind. The JSE's all-share index, for example, snapped a 4-session losing streak in Thursday trading, and European shares also came off 4-week lows. That said, though, those gains were limited by the possibility that any solutions from Washington would be temporary at best. Now, both sides have proposed a short-term rise to the country's $16.7 trillion debt limit. The JSE's all-share index, for example, has, of course, been in quite a bit of flux. It's been trending lower since its annual high in September 25th of 44,453 points. The index has dropped most of this week until today, when investor demand for platinum and banking shares led a relief rally, partly based on the hope of a resolution to the US budget deadlock. So far, The American government has been shut down for the last 10 days, leaving much of the world's economy really holding its breath to see what will happen next. So then, what exactly does this hold for Africa and the rest of the global economy? Let's find out. CCTV's Miriam Bemard is live in London with the latest details here for us. Miriam, a technical default really for the United States is entirely new ground. We've never been here before. What would it look like?
Well, you know, if there isn't a compromise, Rama, on the debt limit and we see a default, common fear is that it will destabilize the global markets within hours, especially the bond markets, and very much put pressure on interest rates. Now, rate increases would shoot up borrowing costs for the U.S. government and also raise capital costs for economies around the world. In terms of pure cash commitments, after October 17th, the U.S. cash reserve would drain quickly. That means everything from its government bonds to its aid contributions and FDI would come to a grinding halt. By the end of this month, the U.S. government would be $7 billion short of paying its bills and another $6 billion owed to bondholders from China to their troops in Afghanistan.
Indeed. Let's zero in on one specific factor as well here. If the Americans do default on their debt, how will that then have an impact on sovereign debt yields, especially from sub-Saharan African issuers?
It's difficult to say right now because the initial reaction to a default would be shock waves through financial markets, particularly economies reliant on U.S. dollar for trade and have a lot of reserves in their central bank in the form of dollars. Up until now, investors have been bullish on African sovereigns, for example, which have been able to issue more hard currency bonds. African economies have their borrowings mostly connected to domestic sources and can potentially reduce their average cost of borrowing. We've also seen the rand, for example, gaining as yields among the highest in emerging markets lured foreign investors to South Africa's bonds, outweighing the risk aversion sparked by the U.S. But the backlash will come from African economies heavily dependent on investment inflows to plug deficits and essentially generate activity within their economies.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being, though. Thank you very much for that. That's CCTV's Miriam Bemard live over in London. Now, I should point out there have been some developments, of course, in the last hour. President Obama, according to Jay Carney, the White House spokesman, says is open to the idea of a short-term rise in the U.S. debt limit. We'll have further updates for you later on, of course, in subsequent bulletins. Now, let's look at the markets and see exactly what they've been doing across the board. We mentioned, of course, earlier there were gains at the JSE. You'll see that shortly. Let's start in Nigeria. First of all, the market ended the day lower there by 0.8. The JSE Ultra Index, however, snapping, of course, that 4-day losing streak. It ended the day higher by 1.13 percentage points. The 20-share index in Nairobi, however, cutting back on some of the gains we've seen over the last trading sessions, down by 0.2 in the Egyptian market on a day when the Americans decided to essentially halt all aid, especially to the military, ending the day higher, up 2.23 percentage points. That's business for you this Thursday. On to the sport now with Beatrice.